Clerk, I'll start then.
Yes, ma'am. Ready to go.
Okay, terrific. Dear colleagues, I call this meeting to order. Bienvenue à la...
Welcome to meeting number 9 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Science and Research.
The Board of Internally Committees adhere to the following health protocols, which are in effect until all individuals wishing to enter the parliamentary precinct must be fully vaccinated against COVID-19. All those attending in person must wear a mask, except for members who are at their place during proceedings. And please contact the clerk of the committee for further information on preventative measures for health and safety. And as the chair, I will enforce these measures. And as always, colleagues, I thank you for your cooperation. La réunion d'aujourd'hui.
Today's meeting will take place in a hybrid format pursuant to the order of the House from November 25th, 2021.
I'd like to outline a few rules to follow. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You may speak in the official language of your choice. At the bottom of your screen, you may choose to hear floor audio or in English or French. The raise hand feature is on the main toolbar should you wish to speak. When you are not speaking, your microphone should be muted. The committee clerk and I will maintain a speaking list for all members. Colleagues, I am delighted tonight. We have wonderful witnesses who are joining us. From Biocan RX, we have Dr. Stephanie Michaud, President and Chief Executive Officer, and Dr. John Bell, Scientific Director. From Stem Cell Technologies, Inc., we have Dr. Alan Eves, President and Chief Executive Officer. And from the Université du Québec, we have François Deschênes, Rector, Université du Québec à Rimouski. And we have Dr. François Deschênes and Dr. Etienne Carbonneau, Director, Support for Internationalization and Government Relations, who's the Senior Advisor. We will now go to hearing from our witnesses. Each group will have 5 minutes. You'll have to tell me, can you see this? If I hold this up, it means you have 30 seconds left, and I do my best to be fair. So we will begin tonight with Biocan RX. For 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Madame la Présidente.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, first, we insist on thanking you for this invitation. We hope that our testimony will provide a unique point of view and data with regards to your important study on the successes, challenges, and opportunities for science in Canada.
And I am President and CEO of Biocan RX, a not-for-profit launched in 2015 that is uniquely focused on accelerating the development of cancer immunotherapies for the benefit of patients. I'm extremely pleased to be joined here today by Dr. John Bell, our Scientific Director and Architect of the Biocan RX Network. Biocan RX works by connecting the dots around a technology and building out the connective tissue between sectors invested and aligned to our mission to do what's needed to advance the technology towards a clinical trial. The result is a highly productive Canadian translational ecosystem in the area of oncology. To provide the committee with an example of our dedication to our mission and ensuing productivity, from 2005 to 2015, less than 1% of oncology clinical trials in Canada were based upon discoveries made in our own labs. As of 2020, Biocan RX had doubled this number. I would now like to turn it on over to Dr. Bell.
Thanks, Stephanie. My name is John Bell. I'm a senior scientist at the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute and a professor of medicine at the University of Ottawa. I currently serve as the scientific director of Biocan RX. So cancer remains the emperor of all maladies. It's causing over 85,000 Canadian deaths this year, and that number is rising. And it's also leaving tremendous economic and sociological carnage in its wake. The good news, however, on the horizon has been the development of a whole new strategy for treating cancer that involves training a patient's immune system to be able to recognize and attack and eliminate their own cancer. And Canadian scientists have made key contributions to the development of this new field of cancer immunotherapy. However, what has been particularly frustrating for me was to see these Canadian discoveries being turned into products outside of our borders. And even worse, seeing Canadian cancer patients having delayed, limited, or no access to breakthrough drugs that were built upon Canadian funded science. It was apparent to me, both as an academic scientist and an entrepreneur, that there has been a major strategic funding and coordination gap in Canada, making it very difficult, if not impossible, for laboratory and biomedical discoveries to be developed into therapeutic molecules within our own country. So this inspired me to apply to the Networks of Centers of Excellence program to form BioCanRx and create what has become, by all measures, a very successful and effective translational ecosystem. Since we build on the existing excellence in science and clinical care in Canada, we are able to cost effectively expedite discoveries out of the lab and into trials. Now, let me give you just two examples of how we've been able to rapidly respond to cancer patient needs in Canada. First, in response to the pandemic, our ecosystem rapidly mobilized its engine of expertise in immunology and clinical trials for cancer patients undergoing treatment to help them stave off a COVID-19 infection. The trial sought to recruit 1,500 Canadians, and from the ideation to the launch of the trial, it all happened in 6 weeks. And this is really light speed for this kind of activity in the biotech sector. And it could only happen because we have a very highly coordinated network of motivated scientists, clinicians, and industry partners, supported by a nimble governance system. A second example is CAR T therapy. This is a type of immune therapy that harnesses the power of a patient's own immune cells to treat their own cancer. Between 2016 and 2018, there were 63 clinical studies where US patients had access to this life-saving therapy. And that same time frame, only 2 CAR T clinical studies sponsored by pharma were conducted in Canada. These were in major urban centers and thus provided very limited access to the vast majority of Canadian patients who might have benefited. BioCanRx scientists and clinicians felt compelled to use our skills, our know-how, and our collective infrastructure to reverse this situation. And I can tell you we are now manufacturing our own made in Canada CAR T therapeutics for the treatment of Canadian patients in a very cost-effective fashion. Through this program, we pioneered the delivery of personalized point-of-care manufactured products for patients with refractory leukemia and lymphoma, with the goal of making these kinds of treatments accessible to Canadians wherever they live in our country. It's our hope that our network will be able to continue enabling science innovators from all sectors to capitalize on existing infrastructure and expertise while developing their technologies on Canadian soil. With the sunsetting of the NC program, however, we are concerned that we'll no longer be able to sustain our support for preclinical to clinical development to those that need it most, the Canadian patient. And we strongly urge the government to consider to keep funding organizations with a demonstrated track record in addressing an unmet need in Canada, such as BioCanRx. And we really appreciate the chance to come and meet with you here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both for presenting. I just want to welcome all our witnesses again. We are very grateful as a committee. I'd also like to welcome today Mr. Lawrence and Mr. Waugh for joining us. Thank you so much. And now I think we're still waiting for Dr. Eves, so I think we will go to the Université du Québec, and we welcome you. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the members of the committee for inviting us here today. I'm François Deschênes. I'm with Université du Québec at Rimouski, UQAR. I'm with Mr. Carbonneau, who is from the head office of l'Université du Québec. UQAR is in the east of Quebec, in Rimouski, but it's not just there. We cover a large region of eastern Quebec that goes from Chaudière-Appalaches to the North Shore. So we're covering a great territory. It's as big as Iceland. There are about 6,700 students on this land. So it's particular for having a very sparsely populated land cover and rural areas. 2/3 of our students are first-generation immigrants whose parents are first-generation students whose parents did not have a university degree. So we think we're bringing a lot to the rural regions with regards to training, the next generation of workers, and attraction and retention of workers so that organizations can develop, offer quality services, and play an important role. Like I said, we are members of the large network of Universités du Québec that includes 10 universities and about 97,000 students. So this makes it a large-scale university network in Canada. One thing I would like to mention is that I'm here today to talk to you about research that we're doing in smaller and medium universities outside of major centers, so rural areas. What's important is to demystify one thing. There are not two categories of universities. There aren't research universities and other universities. All universities have professors who, as part of their work, do training, research, and serve the community. So it's very important to note that. It's also important to know that these researchers need to access funding to develop their research. Let me give you an example. Even though UQAR is small, year over year, it has been in the top three universities in its category in Canada with regards to research statistics, intensity, production, dollars of funding, and also quality. And then in terms of growth, in the last 20 years, we've generated 405% of growth in research funding. That makes us third in Canada. And this is proof that there are not two classes of universities. So we work on research and training, and we're also developing knowledge. The professors that live in these areas are very aware of the issues that affect these regions. Their research is connected to the local reality. So we're developing knowledge that is transferable to these regions, and it's important. Let me give you some examples. We're working on organization and healthcare in rural areas. We're doing maritime research. We're right by the shore of the St. Lawrence. And this allows us to take a leadership position in maritime research. Another thing that's important to mention about smaller universities is how difficult it is to access research funding. Where we are, there are many professors, a third or 25% of them, who do not have funding for their research. Can you imagine people with PhDs in Canada who don't have the funds required to do research? There are many throughout Canada who are in this situation. So we are starving these brains that can provide valuable research. It's important to develop programs that are adapted to our reality, the reality of a smaller university where professors teach many classes, many different classes, rather than having one or two classes that are the same all the time. They have less time for research. So this reality needs to be considered in order to support the diversity that exists when developing programs and projects. Often we set quotas for Canada for research chairs, and these are based on previous funding. So there's already a bias that leads to a higher concentration of funding in certain areas. Of course, we know that it's important to give the funding for researchers so that they can do their work. And this is an important message to send. And I think my 5 minutes are up.
Much, Rector, and we appreciate you being here, and we appreciate your comments. Thank you so much. And now we will go to Dr. Alan Eves, who is the President and Chief Executive Officer for Stem Cell Technologies. Welcome, Dr. Eves, and we will give you the floor for 5 minutes. When you see the yellow card, you have 30 seconds left. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear members of the Standing Committee of Science and Research. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the traditional ancestral and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Salish nations. As President and CEO of Stem Cell Technologies, I welcome the opportunity to speak with members about the contributions of stem cell, which is making for the Canadian science and research ecosystem. Stem Cell Technologies is Canada's largest biotechnology company with over 1,700 employees globally, of whom 1,200 are located in British Columbia. Research focused, we make products that support the life sciences, including some of the ingredients that go into COVID tests and vaccines. Since our founding in 1993, the company has always been profitable with an average annual growth rate of 20%. This year, sales revenue will exceed 400 million. Export-oriented, 97% of our sales are outside of Canada, bringing in those export dollars that are 2 to 3 times more valuable than dollars generated within an economy. At our present growth rate, sales will be $2 billion in 10 years. To manage this growth, we need to hire and train 4,000 new employees. Most require further on-job training and will need to take some of the 500, and they will have to take some of the 500 educational courses we offer internally in our company. This helps mitigate the shortage of people with biomanufacturing training in Canada. That said, stem cell benefits from countries like Ireland, which has a national biopharma training program. Presently, stem cell has over 80 Irish graduates, most of whom have that training and have worked in biopharma in Ireland. Stem cell is known globally for the novelty and quality of its products, which we research, design, and make in Vancouver. In addition, we market immunotherapy and gene therapy. Initially, our products were for research use only. Now, many of our products are in clinical trials with the expectation that they will be used in patients. To make clinical products, stem cells sought federal support to build the required facilities. Thus, in 2017, we had a loan of $22.5 million from the Federal Scientific Innovation Fund and that was matched by the province of British Columbia. This $45 million was then matched 2-to-1 by Stem Cell with a $900 million loan from a bank consortium. This $138 million project called Project Railway is nearing successful completion with the creation of 675 biomanufacturing jobs. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has again highlighted Canada's dependence on foreign suppliers, this time for making the ingredients for viral testing and vaccines. Stem Cell has made a SIF proposal called Project Bedrock to make these ingredients. This has been submitted with the understanding that matching funding will come from British Columbia. Committee members present are asked to remind our colleagues in government that this investment is aligned with Canada's biomanufacturing and life sciences strategy to improve Canada's long-term pandemic resilience. In conclusion, we are grateful that the federal government has made supporting biomanufacturing a priority. However, it should be noted that the leading G7 nations, the United States, Germany, and Japan, each spend over 3% of their GDP on research. Canada spends half this at 1.7% of GDP. Stem Cell suggests that it is imperative that Canada spend more on Canadian research-oriented businesses if we are to remain competitive with our G7 colleagues as well as with China. I thank members for this opportunity to address the committee today and look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eves. And once again, I'd like to thank all our witnesses for your time, your effort, and your expertise today. I'd like you to know you have a really excited committee here. They are very interested in what you have to say. And with that, we will now go to hearing from our members. We will go to the 6-minute round, and we will begin with Ms. Gladue. For 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Very good. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses that have joined us today. We appreciate your testimony. I'm going to start with Dr. Bell. I noted that you are excellent at getting preclinical trials to become clinical trials and to become successful. And I know that there was discussion when the government decided they were going to implement the PMPRB rules to change the drug approval process in Canada to make it longer and more costly. And I wondered, at the time they had suggested that would have a negative impact on clinical trials where Canada actually punches above its weight. I wondered if that will have an influence on your situation.
Stephanie may have some thoughts about that, but I don't think I could really, I know enough about the PMP program to weigh in on that, to be honest. So, Steph, did you have any thoughts on it?
Certainly. So with respect to the PMPRB regulations and for the type of work that we're currently carrying out, it's very much dedicated to early stage clinical trials. So phase 1, phase 1-2, at which point we wouldn't be approaching that territory of the PMPRB regulations. So a long answer to say, in short, it would not impact the clinical trials that we ourselves are bringing forward.
Okay.
Through the research.
For either one of you, you mentioned that your funding is ending for all the success that you've done getting preclinical trials to clinical trials. Why is it ending?
Go ahead, Steph.
Sure. We are funded under the Network of Centers of Excellence program, and this program has run for 30 years, but was sunsetted December of 2018. And so we were allowed to apply for a 3-year extension, but that will take us to March 31st of 2023.
And so you'd recommend that the government extend that funding, especially for people as successful as yourself?
We certainly would.
Okay, very good. Now I want to ask a question for Dr. Eves. You're in a position of showing Canada's leadership in stem cells. And so what should we be doing to help support you to keep that leadership position for Canada?
Maybe you're muted. You're on mute, Alan.
Doug.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we need more funding to support the growth of the industry and to create the jobs. We have a very good educational system. It isn't focused necessarily on this area by manufacturing yet. As I mentioned, in Ireland, they have a really good system to do that, and they have all this biotechnology and pharma industry in Ireland. And we'd like to get some of that in Canada to absorb our graduates. We got a good educational system, but it needs to be a little more focused. And then you need the industry to take up those jobs, right? And so we don't have, sad to say that stem cells is the biggest biotech company in Canada. No, we need many more, right? Bringing in those export dollars, right? So that's really what we need. We need funding to build the companies and some support for training.
Mr. Deschênes, it's difficult for smaller universities to receive funds and to be competitive with their applications. Can you tell us more about this? Yes, of course. There are many examples. For example, if we look to access to funding for Research Chairs of Canada, the training for Canadian innovation, there are quotas that have been imposed in the past on the number of federal funding that can be granted. It caps our access to funding in this area. Another example, when we assess programs and the research projects that are submitted by researchers, committees don't necessarily consider the reality of the researchers and what they're studying. It's not the same thing when a professor has only one class to teach and another one has 4. So if the professor who is less productive because of the teaching doesn't mean he's less productive as a researcher. So we have to assess the potential rather than past excellence, because the potential can be great. And we have to revise assessment criteria. Another thing, more and more, we're seeing matching. We ask the universities what is their financial or in-kind contribution. Smaller institutions don't have as many resources, both financial and human, to contribute. So this doesn't mean that the project is less important either. We can't draw a connection between these two things. So we have to think about the indicators that are used to be able to fully appreciate the potential of a project and to underscore the excellence regardless of the shape it takes. And this is part of supporting diversity. We talk about diversity with underrepresented groups, but between researchers, different establishments, there's a diversity of establishments, and we have to recognize it.
Last question quickly for anybody. I see that you're all successful. What are the
Seconds,
barriers?
Ms. Gladue.
Okay, thanks.
10 seconds. I'm sorry. And Ms. Gladue, thank you for your really very thoughtful, important questions. With that, we're going to go to Mr. Collins for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I think, as you noted earlier, we just have an incredible list of witnesses this evening. And so I'd like to start with Biocan RX and Dr. Michaud. I assume that when the original funding was provided by the government for Biocan RX, there was an expectation that there'd be the ability to leverage private funds. Could you elaborate on your success in that area and what amount of funding have you leveraged with the investment, the original investment that the government made?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for the question, Madam Chair. The original investment made in BioCanRx in 2015 was for $25 million. As I had mentioned, we were allowed to apply for reduced funding and received another $15 million in 2020. Currently, our spend is close to $30 million as we still have monies to put out in this upcoming next year. But what we have been able to do with respect to attracting funding and the program, the NCE program under which we were funded, has an expectation of reaching a one-to-one funding match. But because of the space in which we operate, the ability to be able to shepherd technologies and continue to add value as we bring them through the preclinical to clinical phase, we've been able to turn that $30 million spend into close to $96 million of leverage funding going all the way back to 2015. And it's really because of the type of engine that we have built has been able to attract significant funding from a multitude of different sector partners.
Well, congratulations. That's an incredible number in terms of what the expectations were and what you delivered. If I could ask then on the sunsetting of the program and some of the questions that Madame Gladue brought up in terms of your funding that you have currently, it expires when? And is there a funding gap with the funds that you have now and the timeline that you have to reapply for additional funding?
Thank you very much for the question. The funding, the NCE funding that we currently hold, the additional $15 million, runs till March 31st of 2023. We have been allowed to operate as a network of centers of excellence until March 31st of 2024, but this is self-funded. We are very fortunate to have been given the opportunity to apply to the Strategic Science Fund, which we're waiting to hear whether or not we will be able to continue in the competitive process. If we were funded under this program, the funding would begin in April of 2024, which still means that there's a one-year gap between when our NCE funding ends and when the Strategic Science Fund funding would begin if we were successful.
Okay, thank you. So your recommendation would be then to fill that gap with funding to give you that bridge financing, so to speak, that allows you then to get to the next application process.
To allow us to be able to continue to carry out our activities and not lose the momentum that we have built up since being funded in 2015, and to be able to continue to execute on life-saving clinical trials and deliver value for both the private sector, the academic sector, and of course, patients across the country. Thank you,
Dr. Michaud, and thank you, Dr. Bell. Madam Chairman, if I could move on then to Mr. Deschenets. If I could ask, it must be incredibly difficult to attract top talent in terms of professors as well as students to rural area. I think I look back to my own university days, and I think most of the people I attended university with were more inclined to apply to large urban centers. And so can I ask how you've overcome that issue? And what can the government do to support enrollment numbers in smaller, mid-sized universities, and specifically those in rural areas?
pour moi, excusez, ça a coupé, oui. Merci pour la question. En fait, en termes d'attraction et de rétention des étudiants, c'est certain que quand on parle au niveau de la recherche, d'être capable d'avoir suffisamment de subventions, ça permet ultimement de reverser beaucoup de ces subventions-là sous forme de bourses aux étudiants, aux étudiantes, qui est un élément important, le financement durant les études. Donc, à partir de ces données...
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Lawrence, lack of translation.
Yes.
We will go back. We will give our rector an extra minute to be fair. And can we check that the translation is there now, please?
I'm doing a test. Do you hear me now?
Monsieur Rector.
So what I was saying is that one of the important elements that the federal government can do is provide funding and bursaries. This funding and bursaries for universities are sent to regions. And many people know this, but a lot of this funding is carried over to the students, and this is something we can use to attract students. We're able to provide bursaries that are competitive with other universities. So that's one key element. Once these students have been attracted and they've been trained in these areas, they often end up settling there. They develop a career in the regions and they can contribute to their vitality. I would say that 2/3 or 3/4 of our students end up practicing in the area where the university is. So this is a very important vector for attraction and retention. Let's make sure to remember it.
Thank you for that answer, Rector. Last question I would have, Madam Chair, is for
Very short, Mr. Collins, please.
Oh.
Very short.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. To Dr. Eves, the incredible export numbers that you talked about earlier. Could you just elaborate on Project Bedrock? You talked about matching government funding from the province. What can the federal government do to support that initiative from a funding or policy perspective?
It's to give us the facilities to help support the facilities that we need to go with clinical products, right? Our focus has traditionally been research use only products, but we're now moving into clinical grade products. Our medias are in 40 different clinical trials. We want to be able to do the same for the components that go into vaccines and testing reagents for the pandemic. And we have the capability to do this.
Dr. Eves, I'm sorry to interrupt. I hope someone else will pick up this train of thought. My apologies. With that, maintenant, je vous passe la...
I would now like to give the floor to Mr. Blanchet-Jonca. You have 6 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Please allow me to thank the witnesses for being with us tonight. My questions are mainly for Mr. Deschênes and Mr. Carbonneau. First, thank you for being with us tonight. Mr. Deschênes, I appreciated your opening remarks. You highlighted some important issues that small universities or medium universities are facing in rural areas. I would like to react to what you said. You mentioned that the Réseau Universitaire du Québec is a large network. I would allow myself to say that it is the largest university network in Canada. I'm very proud of that, and I'm a proud graduate of this network. So, Mr. Deschênes, you highlighted the inequity that smaller rural universities are facing. Can you tell us more about tangible solutions that we can use to counteract this phenomenon? So, concrete solutions are many. I was highlighting the challenges. I was talking about taking into account the reality of professors in smaller universities in rural areas. We have to ensure that there's representation in selection committees. Another solution would be to include on application forms a section that can allow applicants to describe their reality so that it could be better appreciated. And it's also a way to highlight accomplishments. Another thing I mentioned earlier is how quotas are established when granting funding in certain funding. Another thing I mentioned earlier is the issue of contribution matching. We're not on an equal footing on that front, so this is something that should be considered. And you know what? Ideally, I don't think there should be a matching element. We're not funding institutions. The money we use is for training students. So asking establishments to match, they don't have the financial margins to be able to contribute. So that needs to be considered. Also, in establishing programs, this is something that needs to be considered from the start. When programs are created, criteria have to take that into consideration. I'm not saying we need to dumb anything down. I think we just have to make sure that universities have to have the opportunity to prove themselves. Even if they don't necessarily have the critical mass, it doesn't mean that they're not as good. It just means that they're probably alone and they've developed the skill of collaboration with other researchers. So how can this be underscored or taken into account in evaluating projects? Thank you for the information that you've shared. You talked about excellence and how to measure excellence. This could be one way to resolve this inequity. Can you tell us more about how to do this? You know, I'm a great supporter of measuring potential. Potential can be considered in many ways. Excellence is often assessed on a set of indicators. How many articles were published? You look at their past and then you say this person is excellent. But a person who's in less optimal situations will not be producing as much. So how can we evaluate their excellence relatively and think about it more like potential? Is there potential? This comes back to what I was saying earlier. We need criteria that are sufficient, adequate. Our committees need to be aware of these realities. Thank you very much. You said that 25% of researchers have a PhD are not able to get funding. So we're losing this expertise. We're losing their talent. Do you have solutions for this to make sure that we reduce or eliminate this problem, ideally? Well, studies have shown that even small funding amounts can be very helpful. Production or productivity is not proportional to the size of the funding. So it's important to fund researchers who are trained researchers, and it's important to give them the minimum means necessary to do their research. That way we could take advantage of all of the brains we have that are trained for research. So we need different programs in funding agencies that will meet these researchers' needs. This would completely change the future and help us harness all that potential. Another thing, in smaller establishments, they are often less oriented towards healthcare, but we have to think that health research can take many shapes. And so we have to think about funding research without having necessarily a medical faculty. This would allow us to innovate everywhere and to find solutions that are adapted to the diversity of Canada's regions. Thank you. What are we losing when we don't fund these brains that have been trained for research? Well, this is a huge issue for developing communities, loss of capacity, loss of ability to find solutions to the challenges faced by these areas. You know what I see? There's an analogy I often use. I say that, say a money has a lot of money and buys a lot of cars and they don't use them, or they spend all their money on buying cars and don't have the money to put gas in them. So right now there are brains that could be contributing to Canada, but they don't have the right funding. This is an enormous loss. We never know where the next revolutionary idea will come from. So we have to make sure to create fertile ground for this research. I'm so sorry. The time is up. Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca, thank you very much for your questions.
I'll go to Mr. Canning's, and if you allow me, it is Mr. Canning's birthday, so we wish him wonderful returns today and for the year. Mr. Canning, to you for
Thank you, Madam
6
Chair.
minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Unnecessary, but thank you. I will, as I think Mr. Collins said, this is a very interesting panel yet again. I'm going to start with Biocan RX, and I did meet with Ms. Michaud of Biocan RX a couple of weeks ago, so I got a bit of a taste of what you've been doing. It sounds very innovative and exciting, a sort of distributed network of science and applying that science to do very exciting and important things, life-changing things for cancer patients, for instance. I guess I have so many questions. I'll start with maybe with Dr. Bell and just ask, how does, when we're considering the government investment here into this network that includes universities and investigators and private investors, I imagine, where does the IP rest with this? And if we are going to, say, export this, how can Canadian companies benefit from your work? I'll just leave it there.
Great question. Sure. No, I'm happy to answer that. I mean, I think it's an important question. And I guess what Biocan is concerned about is that our IP will go outside the country and be developed elsewhere. So right now, if an academic scientist should develop an invention, it belongs to that scientist and his research institute. They have to support the patents and try to find a way to develop them. But of course, if they don't have any resources to do that, the scientist often is obligated to go outside the country to try to find a way to protect that intellectual property and develop it elsewhere. So what we're trying to do is say, hey, we're already investing in Canada in many ways. We're making great science, we're making great, lots of infrastructure, great clinical care. Let's just bring it all together and make sure that our IP is actually cultivated, maintained, and actually established and produced in Canada, as opposed to giving it away. We all know the story of insulin. Insulin's been, developed in Canada many, many years ago, and it's never been manufactured here. So, to Alan's point, I think we need to start investing in our own biomanufacturing, our own science that we're already paying for to make things happen here.
Right, and you mentioned the CAR-T program that you're heavily involved with. I believe from my previous meeting that techniques like that, for treating a patient in the United States cost more than $450,000. You've developed innovative ways to bring that down to, say, $100,000. It's still a lot of money. I'm just wondering, again, where you see that. Is there an endpoint where it's far cheaper, or I guess I'm concerned about, this is exciting, as I say, life-changing, life-saving science for patients. How patients will be able to afford that? Are governments covering the costs of that when you're treating them? Or, well, I'll stop there because I'll just take up your time, and I'd rather listen to you.
Well, no, it's again the right question to ask, because these are incredible new therapies, and in many cases providing people a very long extended lifespan, if not a cure. And as you point out, to right now, in the case of CAR-Ts, for instance, when we send a patient to Pennsylvania or to Seattle to be treated, it can cost the government upwards of $1 million, with the patient upward of $1 million, and often covered by the government. So by creating in our own infrastructure here in Canada, we'll be able to control those costs. And Steph and I talk all the time about the concept of creating B Corps, for instance, things that actually can care more about Canadians and their patients than we do about investors, essentially. And I think there's ways to be creative and get inventions developed here and maintained here and priced for the way the Canadian system can stand. So I think it's soluble. I just think we've gotten ourselves into a mindset that we have to do it the big pharma way. And I think there's many ways to get around that. And as you point out, we already have the cost down to about $100,000 per patient. And I know we can do way better than that, because we've only treated a small number of patients so far. And, if we build our own infrastructure, I think the costs can be controlled and brought down. And you have to also weigh into it the cost of having a curative therapy versus therapies which we currently give, which are not curative. And that costs a lot of money too. So I think there's a rationale for investing in these new technologies.
And just another question on the timeline here. I think Ms. Michaud was talking about, stage 1, stage 2 trials. Is your network going to continue down the path through all those trials so that we will complete all that work in Canada so that patients on those trials can benefit here in Canada?
That's our dream, of course, and the way we do that is to work with companies in Canada like Alan's company, that kind of company that's here in Canada, so that we can help facilitate those phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies here, get it approved in Canada, and also during that whole process, as you point out, Mr. Cannings, is actually being able to treat Canadian patients right now with therapies which are proving to be curative. So I think that's a good strategy.
Okay, one quick question. I have a couple of seconds left. I'll just stay with you, Dr. Bell, and that is around having a single national formulary for pharmaceuticals. Would that be beneficial for BioCanRx?
We've talked about that, and I think there is certainly value in that for the kinds of things we're doing to make sure that we have a pricing system that will work for Canadian and the Canadian healthcare system. And congratulations on your 40th birthday too.
Thank you. You must have forgotten your glasses.
Thank you, Mr. Cannings. Thank you to all our witnesses. We are now going to go into the second round, and this will be a 5-minute round, and we'll begin with Mr. Soroka.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses tonight for coming. Dr. Bell, you did want to finish off, I think, a bit more, or at least I wanted to know a bit more. You talked about building a network or an infrastructure and how we could make that more cost-effective in Canada. I'm intrigued as to what kind of ideas would you have in setting that up and how would it be more cost-effective?
Well, let me just give you an example. This actually already exists to some extent in our hospitals. We do what are called bone marrow transplants, which I assume everybody's heard about. In fact, Alan's company does a lot of products to support that kind of activity. And bone marrow transplants are done across the country, point of care type of treatment, and they're quite affordable, and they do great things for patients. And the kinds of therapies we're talking about are very similar to that. So we can leverage what we already have infrastructure in place. It's really about being very Canadian and working together. And that's what our network does. It's really bringing the best minds together and the best thought leaders and clinicians and scientists to really build here what we know that we need.
Okay, thank you for that. I didn't realize, you're right, we can back onto a lot of things that are pre-existing already, so that's a very good point. Mr. Deschamps, you had spoken about how, it's rural universities or colleges are not getting adequate funding. Are you having also a bigger problem with being in French language, or even with researchers producing their position papers or getting funding in that regards because of the French language as well?
Thank you for the question. Indeed, many researchers in engineering and natural sciences have the feeling that their requests are assessed differently when they're written in French compared to when they're written in English. It's easier to find evaluators that speak English throughout the world than to find assessors that speak French. So maybe there's something to be assessed there. I think in the past at the CRHS, they had done some work on that. I think we'd have to do some research to see if this bias still exists. Beyond that, I think the composition of selection committees is important to make sure that bilingualism is respected, or to at least have enough francophones among assessors, because I think there's a way of presenting things that's different, and the evaluations. Also, if we can publish in French, the recognition of these publications, it's more difficult to assess, and I think that that's an important consideration as well.
Thank you for that. I'm not certain if this is for Dr. Machard or Dr. Bell, but when it comes to funding, you had said that you're going into a sunset clause in one of the agreements there. But, you know, they talk about a lot of funding that comes from the private sector for different organizations. How much of that private funding actually assists in any type of research or development? Is that about a 5 or a 10%, or still goes higher? Or could you give me a breakdown maybe of how much money is actually coming in from government versus private sectors?
Certainly. So currently, the amount of funding that we've been able to attract as a result of a financial outlay currently of approximately 30 million is close to 96. So the figure is 95.78. And so and this is as a result of being able to connect all of the dots that are necessary in order to advance, a preclinical asset all the way through to a clinical trial. When you build these types of engines that work, that are producing results, that are filled with experts, the right clinicians that are developing some very exciting assets, the private sector takes notice and wishes to invest. Another key point to recall is that when we work at BioCanRx, we utilize a pipeline approach. And so because we're a mission-oriented organization, very much looking to increase the number of clinical trials so that patients, a greater number of patients in Canada, can benefit from domestic clinical trials, we invest in a technology with this in mind. What is the clinical trial for this going to look like? And as we progress down that pipeline, the amount of monies that we're able to attract from the private sector, of course, increase. And so in terms of leverage ratios in our clinical trial program, we're approaching ratios approaching 8-to-1 on the dollar, and it's because there's greater value that's been introduced into the asset under development.
Okay, thank you for that, and I'm pretty certain the chair is going to tell me my time is up.
I regret, my colleague, my friend. But thank you, Mr. Soroka, for those questions. And with that, we will now go to Monsieur Lauzon for 5 minutes.
Mr. Lauzon, you have 5 minutes. I would like first to thank all of the witnesses who are here this evening. It's Thursday night for everyone, so thank you for being here. My first question is for Mr. Bell from BioCanRx. You piqued my curiosity when you talked about biomanufacturing. You gave the example of insulin. You suggested that insulin could have been produced in Canada. Do you have an idea of the advantages that would exist if we produced these products in Canada instead of doing it elsewhere? And does this have an impact on supply chains?
Great question, and actually great points, actually. The reality is when you manufacture in a particular country, you don't want to move your manufacturing plant. You want to keep it there for the duration of that product's lifetime because it costs a lot of money to move it around. It stays in our country. And so, for instance, Dr. Eads' company, which is trying to manufacture in Canada, it's not going to go anywhere else because he's got the infrastructure here and the personnel here. So by building that kind of biomanufacturing infrastructure in Canada, we're going to anchor companies in Canada. They're going to stay here. People are going to be trained to work in those companies, and we're going to generate, for the economy. So I think it's really important. And what we often do is have our stuff manufactured offshore, and as you suggest, that can have an impact on supply chains as well. So there's so many reasons why it makes a lot of sense to build in Canada, build biomanufacturing in particular, so that we can provide products for our own patients.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for that answer. Mrs. Michaud, earlier you also piqued my curiosity. You were talking about funding sources that are broken down for various periods. What would be the impacts on 2024 if you didn't have that year of funding? Let's talk about retention, researchers, developing products, the connections we have with all of the MOs. Can you give us some examples? Yes, absolutely. Thank you for this question. The impact of course, is that we wouldn't be able to move on with our projects. Clinical trial projects could not be funded. We couldn't continue funding them or attracting new ones. Even when our budget was slashed by 40% in 2020, we had to cut the first stage of our product pipeline because we didn't have enough money to support it. What we did is that we continued to invest in products that were already further along. We wanted to get them closer to clinical trials. So by having this period without any funding at all, you mentioned retention, the BioCanRx team, but there's also a lack of continuity in a given project. We've really built an engine that functions to evaluate and have technologies advance towards clinical trials. So it would really be a full stop work. It would have a major impact, sir. Thank you. Thank you very much for the answer. Mr. Deschênes, the president of U15, Gilles Patry, mentioned in this committee that many Canadians don't go get higher education. They stop before the master's degree or PhD levels compared to students in other Western countries. Is this a situation you're experiencing, and what would be the best way to solve this problem? Yes, this is absolutely something that we've observed in our universities, especially in rural areas. The job market is very attractive. There are many jobs here, and we have a labor shortage. But one thing that is important to do is to improve the amounts of grants and scholarships at higher levels. Students rather go get a decent job rather than to get a grant of $15,000 or $20,000 every year. So if we could have a top-up, it would allow us to attract and retain these students better. And these students are the researchers of tomorrow, so we need to think about it now to make sure that we have a next generation of researchers. I think my time is up.
Monsieur Lauzon. And with that, dear colleagues, we've reached the end of our time. We would really, I know all the committee has really enjoyed this. Good discussion, and we're very grateful to all of you for taking your time. And if you're interested, we hope you'll come back. With that, dear colleagues, we will suspend while we get ready for our next panel. Thank you again, everyone. Good night.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry to interrupt. If we
to order, and we welcome our guests to the second panel tonight of our 9th meeting. As you know, this is the inaugural Science and Research Committee and the inaugural study on successes, challenges, and opportunities for science in Canada. So for this panel, our committee is really pleased to welcome as an individual Dr. Jessie Lee McIsaac, an assistant professor, a Canada Research Chair in Early Childhood, Diversity and Transitions from Mount St. Vincent University. We are pleased to welcome Dr. Victor Refuse, Director and Professor at Dalhousie Universities with the Brain Repair Center. And from Triumph, we have Dr. Nigel Smith, who is the Executive Director. We will now go to testimony. You each will have 5 minutes. When you see me give the yellow card, that means we're at the 4.5-minute mark, and I do my best to be fair to everyone. So we will begin with Dr. McIsaac for 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the committee for the invitation to share my thoughts on the successes, challenges, and opportunities for science in Canada. It's really an honor to have the opportunity to speak with the committee this evening. So before I begin, I do want to start by acknowledging that I'm joining from my home in Halifax, which is in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq Nation. I also would like to pay respects to the histories, contributions, and legacies of the African Nova Scotian communities, which have been here for over 400 years. So I'm an assistant professor within the Faculty of Education and the Department of Child and Youth Study at Mount St. Vincent University. And at the Mount, as was mentioned, I'm a Tier 2 Canada Research Chair in Early Childhood. So Tier 2 positions are awarded to exceptional emerging researchers that have been acknowledged to be leaders in their field. During my tenure, I have established the Early Childhood Collaborative Research Center, which engages families as well as partners in policy and practice in research to enhance early childhood well-being. I receive tri-agency funding from both the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council and the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, along with funding from nonprofit organizations, provincial government sources, and the Public Health Agency of Canada. In my remarks, I'm going to be focused on 3 key points, and I'll get right to it. So first, we're facing complex population health and social issues in Canada. The pandemic has had different impacts on us all, and it's certainly highlighted the inequity that exists in our communities. And as we look toward an equitable pandemic recovery, applying an engaged scholarship approach to science in Canada would mean bridging the gap between theory and practice by integrating scientific and practical knowledge. This means ensuring our research questions are relevant and meaningful to Canadians. So in my work, this means leveraging family voice by considering how the social determinants of health influence families and a child's well-being. Knowledge mobilization is a central part of our work, and we do this by engaging partners in the co-production of research, as well as extending our traditional research outputs to support research to have an impact on policy and practice. One brief example is a recently completed Photo Voice project with newcomer families in Halifax, where we learned more about how they navigated programs and services for young children. Families took pictures of their daily lives and talked to us about the challenges they faced related to employment, language, and also how they relied on their social networks to support them in their settlement journey. The results of this research was shared through an outdoor photo exhibit and other public spaces such as libraries and museums, and is helping to inform adjustments to the implementation of programs for families in communities alongside of new research that we're conducting with our settlement agency partners. So second, I provide my remarks today as an early career researcher. Other witnesses have shared their advice for increased investments in funding for research. As you consider these investments, I'd like to highlight the importance of incorporating an equity lens in research funding. While the pandemic has resulted in some new opportunities for funding, it's also highlighted the disparities that have emerged within the scientific community, particularly those that relate to gender, race, and caregiving. While there have been a few studies that have identified these early experiences, the long-term impacts on the career progression for many of these individuals, including our trainees, will take some time to emerge. We need to be proactive and develop supports for those scientists most affected by the pandemic to avoid a further deepening of the inequities. And then finally, a topic that was brought up in the first part of this session was the need to be thinking about enabling research across the country and recognizing institutional and regional assets. Working at a smaller institution on the East Coast, there are perceived barriers to our capacity for large-scale research, which we often see through the peer review process. What's often missed are the unique strengths that come from working at a small institution like Mount St. Vincent University, which is strongly committed to fostering equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. So an example of this is our institution was established for the advancement of women with social responsibility and social justice at its core. We're one of the 17 universities and colleges from across Canada and the only Nova Scotia institution selected to work with the Tri-Agency Dimensions team to foster increased excellence, innovation, and creativity within the post-secondary sector across all disciplines through a focus on equity, diversity, and inclusion. My research program is also greatly enabled in our small province through the ability to foster strong partnerships with policymakers and communities, something that can be different in larger regions. So thank you again for the invitation to share my remarks. I look forward to your questions and further discussion about the successes and opportunities for science in Canada.
Thank you so much, Dr. McIsaac, and we appreciate hearing from an early career researcher, and we thank you for being here. We will now go to Dr. Victor Refuse for 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to also thank the committee for this opportunity to give my presentation today. And actually, I'd also like to thank the government and previous governments for their support for research in Canada. Without that support, we would not be where we're at today. Is there room for more? I guess that's why we're here. And so, but thank you for your support. I think that's something that's often missed in these opportunities. So I'm going to focus on 3 things. I think many of them you probably heard several times, and they're fairly broad. They're not specific, but the number one issue is the importance of hypothesis-driven research. Hypothesis-driven research is the foundation of all innovation across Canada and the world, across every field. Doesn't matter which field you're looking at, if it all goes back to hypothesis-driven research. And in our field, it's basically, I'm in the science and medical sciences field, that's coming from Tri-Council. So Tri-Council, whether it's NSERC or SHRC or CIHR, that really is not just the foundation for hypothesis-driven research for the most part. It's also the engine of research across Canada. That really is what drives the research in individual labs. And without that research in individual labs, there is no greater research in Canada, right? And if you have initiatives for people to be able to participate in the initiative, they have to have an active lab, and to have an active lab, they have to have, in our field, a Tri-Council funding. And so I think it's critical. It's important, and I think it's at a moment of stability. We've adjusted the stability, but it needs to grow so that the health of the research community in Canada can grow with it. The second thing that I think is critically important, and I think was already touched on even this evening, is geographical diversity. I mean, geographical diversity is critical in research. I mean, Canada prides itself of being a diverse country, from St. John's to Vancouver, from Windsor to Iqaluit and beyond. This is what makes Canada Canada, and this is what makes Canada great. It's not only makes what Canada great, it drives the economy. It's what's healthy for Canada. It's also what's healthy for research. You need research from across Canada to actually challenge and build on the ideas of all research around the world. And without that, I think it creates a level of non-equity, and I think the health of research in Canada suffers dramatically from that. And like a point on that is, is equity of research in federal funding is not as equitable as it could be, in my opinion. So every time there's a federal grant that adds a match to that federal grant, you've just knocked out a large number of smaller universities, right? So you add that match, and we can match. There's ways that we can match some of the smaller initiatives, like the smaller individual CFIs. But once you come to a larger CFI or any of the larger grants where there's a match, it's gone, right? And so therefore, it's not a federal program. It's not a federal program. It's not available for everyone, and it's critically dire for the really small provinces. And in Atlantic Canada, that would be PEI, where CFIs for individuals is almost zero because they can't access funding. So to say that CFI is a true federal funding, in my opinion, is not accurate. It advantages the wealthier provinces over others. And the third issue is a little bit more vague, but it's an issue that we've been working on as neuroscientists across Canada, is to try to come across a neuroscience or a brain policy. And I think, and I'll leave it with the aging brain is increasing the need for this at a rate that we've never seen before in mankind. And it's particularly dire in Canada, where our aging population actually outpaces the rest of the world. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Refuse. We appreciate you being here, and we're grateful for your expertise. And now we will go to, oh, we may have a technical difficulty, Mr. Clerk.
We had another participant had their mic on. We've turned it off.
Thank you so much, Mr. Clark. We will now go to Dr. Nigel Smith from Triumph for 5 minutes, please.
Good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. Thank you so much for inviting Triumph to appear before you on this important study. My name is Nigel Smith, and I'm Executive Director of Triumph, Canada's Particle Accelerator Centre. I would like to first acknowledge that Triumph is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people, who for millennia have passed on their culture, history, and traditions from one generation to the next on this site. This land has always been a seat of learning. Located on the campus of the University of British Columbia, Triumph is a world-class subatomic physics and accelerator facility that, using world-unique infrastructure, carries out fundamental science and applied research that is changing the world. Founded more than 50 years ago, Triumph plays a significant role in Canada's science and innovation ecosystem as one of the largest major research facilities, colloquially known as big science facilities. These enterprises, Snow Lab and the Canadian Light Source being other examples, provide infrastructure that no single university can support, and by bringing together a critical mass of researchers and engineers, can develop new ways of addressing problems and enable Canada to compete at scale in the global science and innovation enterprise. Triumph is owned and operated by a consortium of Canadian universities, with operations primarily supported by federal investment over the last 50 years, for which we are highly grateful. Over the last 5 decades, well over $1 billion of capital has been invested into Triumph, including the largest conventional cyclotron in the world and a new $100 million accelerator complex in final construction. Collectively, the massive investment in Triumph has created the opportunity for many successes in Canadian science. From advancing our understanding of the origins of the universe to developing next generation materials and cures for cancer, we are at the forefront of research domestically and act as the portal to other world-class international facilities like CERN in Geneva. We have enabled Nobel Prize-winning research, addressed emergent crises, and played a leading role in Canada's effort to establish itself as a global innovator for medical isotopes. We're currently developing radioisotopes for both diagnostics and therapy, with a new $60 million facility coming online later this year, supporting both federal and provincial needs around isotope security and innovation. The pandemic has also highlighted the requirements of having resilience within the national research and development ecosystem. Major research facilities play a critical role in this regard, industry and government, and with the ability to be agile in addressing these emergent issues. As an example, in the face of the COVID pandemic, several Canadian major research labs joined forces, led by Nobel laureate Art MacDonald, to rapidly design, prototype, and move to market a new type of ventilator to assist in the pandemic response. This also demonstrates the benefit of having that strong network of major research facilities within Canada. There are challenges in delivering these successes, however. Canada has a globally unique approach to major research facilities, and the associated challenge of managing the full life cycle of these labs has been identified for many years. Much work has been done on this topic over several decades, and we understand ICED has taken up the matter again recently, but it does remain pressing. From the perspective of the major research facilities, we are national assets here to help, but we require established frameworks and champions to plan and execute effectively over the long time scales required to develop these types of infrastructure. But this challenge is also an opportunity. By optimizing the support mechanisms for the major research facilities, Canada can extract maximum value from the major investments already made, provide a multidisciplinary environment to train highly qualified personnel, attract leading talent to Canada, and continue the legacy of world-leading research and benefits for our society. In summary, Triumph and Canada's other major research facilities have a demonstrable track record for delivering world-class science, enabling the success of the research community in Canada, translating this research into societal benefits, and providing valuable training to highly qualified personnel. There are challenges in optimizing the investment being made in these facilities, but these national assets can and do deliver for Canadians. Finally, it would be remiss of me not to invite the committee to tour Triumph should such a visit be possible as part of your deliberations or simply during the next time you find yourself in Vancouver. The scale of our infrastructure really should be seen in person to be appreciated. Thank you very much for your time and the opportunity to talk to this committee.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. And I'd really like to thank Dr. McIsaac, Dr. Refuge, and Dr. Smith for coming tonight, for your important perspectives. You have this brand new committee who really care about what you have to say. And with that, we're going to go to our members. We're going to go to the first round. It's for 6 minutes. And we're beginning with Mr. Soroka. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses again for coming tonight. I appreciate some have gone for a few more hours longer than others, depending on which part of the country you're at. Now, Dr. McIsaac, I was quite intrigued by early childhood learning or assisting with different types of ways to improve our society. And I've always looked at the fact that we should really be starting before the child is even born. So my question is coming, are we actually getting enough funding to assist in even before childhood, or are we just more focused on the child that's alive already, not even on the parents before they become parents?
Thanks. That's a really important question. I think there's been a lot more attention on the area of early childhood, certainly as we understand more and more about how critical those early years are on a child's trajectory and on a family as well. In terms of the split of funding in different areas and facets that influence early childhood, I would say that's a great question, and I'm not sure. I think there certainly could be more, and we also know so much about how the social determinants of health of a family in a community can really impact the child. And that certainly starts from before the child is born. So certainly a really important area and one that needs more attention.
Okay, thank you for that. I was just more intrigued as to if you had any more information. And if you did want it to share in the future, you could write us in to supply that as well, if you think of something later.
Okay, will do.
I would like to now go on to Dr. Smith. And you know, you had spoken a lot about the different types of funding opportunities where universities are partnering to create these new research facilities and that. And I was just curious, you had talked about the new facility for the isotopes, and how was that funded, and how did that become such a world-leading facility?
Thank you for the question. So the funding for that is a combination of federal, provincial, and additional research funds from other organizations. And so the $60 million that is required to build the facility has come from a variety of those sources. And I think it demonstrates one of the challenges in terms of building the research portfolio, in terms of having to draw across all of these various sources of funding to make sure that you are able to actually execute on these sort of programs. And so it was an extended period of developing research proposals, developing these research threads to pull together the overall portfolio. And we are, as I say, at the moment, just about to complete the first outfitting. And we're working with some of the provincial partners to complete the internal outfitting of some of the labs that will remain open.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Smith. And please, I'm going to go on with your questioning too. You had said that we're able to compete with other countries around the world, either with the funding that we currently have, and yet other countries are at twice the GDP that we are. And yet, could you explain how come we're able to compete even though that we're not being funded as highly as other countries?
Thank you for the question. It's a matter of the choice of the areas into which we work. And I think one of the benefits of that the Canadian system does have is the way that people will collaborate together and actually make decisions and focus on particular areas. If I give you an example of the particle physics community within Canada, we work into the accelerator lab in Geneva called CERN, which is the global facility for particle physics. And there are a variety of detectors at CERN looking for things like the Higgs particle and so on. And the Canadian community came together, and rather than deciding to work on all 4 of the detectors, it decided we will work on a single detector. And by doing so, by working solely on Atlas, we've basically been able to focus all of our efforts onto that single detector and had a real impact within the Atlas collaboration. So I think it's basically a question of the choices that are made, the collaborative ability of Canadians and Canadian researchers to focus and pull together on a variety of different areas.
Okay, thank you for that as well. Dr. Smith, I still want to question you on another part. You had said that also there's challenges when you're collaborating, and you had just mentioned how there was a focus then dealing on one area. Does that mean that 2 or 3 other researchers didn't get to have their projects completed? Is this some of the challenges, and how do you kind of get around those challenges?
So I think one of the key aspects here is the scale of the projects that we have to deal with in areas like particle physics, nuclear physics, and even moving into medical isotopes, is that these are large-scale platforms that one needs to develop. And so the way that you have to build those platforms is to make sure that you have a consistent strategy across the community. And I think this is one of the areas where particle physics and nuclear physics in particular does well, is that there is an extended discussion within the academic research community, pulling together a long-term strategy, a long-term program, which is then put towards funding within the federal and provincial structures. And so by ensuring that you have a focus from the community, that then allows you to basically capitalize on that focus when one goes for funding.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Smith. I'll move on to Dr. Rafuse there. You had mentioned something.
Mr. Soroka, I'm sorry, that's your 6 minutes. Thank you for those questions. They're important questions. And now we will go to Ms. Diab for 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and welcome to all our witnesses here this evening. As the chair said, this is the inaugural Science and Research Committee of Parliament, first of its kind. And welcome to all of you, I guess, from one coast to another coast, although I have to say, being a member that represents Halifax West, I'm extremely pleased and privileged to be able to ask both Dr. McIsaac and Dr. Rafuse a couple of questions tonight in the very few short minutes that I do have. First, I want to thank both of you. There's been other witnesses in the past that made similar points, but really want to thank both of you to sort of shine a light on the inequities of researchers and funding when it comes to smaller jurisdictions, particularly like Nova Scotia and quite frankly, like Atlantic Canada. And I know from experience, because I've visited both Mount St. Vincent and Dalhousie at the Repair Center and the Mount with all the great work that's happening in the early childhood, but also the Aging Center as well. And I know we punch above our weights. Dr. Rafuse, let me just start by asking you directly on the research that you and your team are doing at the Brain Repair Center, and just tell me a bit about that, what you're doing provincially, nationally, internationally. I know as much as you can in a short few minutes, and how really that helps the research patients practically. And so I'm going to let you explain some of that, because I know you didn't have a chance to do that.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity to talk and address that question. So the Brain Repair Center is a medical neuroscience institute, as you well know, are really, by using the word medical, that basically means the patient outcome is really the final outcome, right? So in all the research that we're doing, we're actually thinking about the outcome of the individuals that are facing the disorders that they have. We've developed a system at the Brain Repair Center to really focus on 3 main areas that really drive all they're very inclusive, and one is neurodegeneration, which is really and you can break it down that most neurological disorders that certainly occurred in aging that has to do with neurodegeneration. So there's a neurodegeneration research group. There's a neurodevelopment group, and neurodevelopment starts as early as in the fetus, but also continues to go throughout life certainly into adolescence, where a lot of developmental issues that we don't think are developmental issues, but such things as autism and schizophrenia and the emergence of things like bipolar disorders. So those are really developmental disorders, and that's another sort of main focus. And sort of the third main focus is because we have a localized strength in that areas and mobility issues, and in particular mobility issues that pertain to mobility of driven by spinal cord disorders. And so that would be spinal cord injuries and disorders of diseases of the spinal cord, predominantly things like ALS and spinal muscular atrophy. So those are the strengths that we do, and we're very collaborative. I think what we've done successfully here is we've connected with all institutes across Canada. I mean, this is I think this is a recurring theme. There's a collaboration right across Canada, and I think we've set up a network of institute directors across Canada to make sure that we're talking together frequently, and that's part of a brain strategy that we're working on right now. More locally, I think it's important that we're working outside of Halifax, and including the strengths of New Brunswick and PEI. We haven't reached out to Newfoundland yet, just because of time at this point in time. But we like it to be actually a maritime or Atlantic Canada initiative. How are we addressing the patient? I think a lot of it is, again, it's bench to bedside approach, and I think that's always important. And it's a terminology that it's used very often, but I think it's a terminology that's often sort of, I wouldn't say misused, but not taken as seriously as it is. And a lot of our scientists are actually clinical scientists that come into the lab because they're faced with problems. So, for example, Dr. Adrienne Weeks is a neurosurgeon who specializes in brain tumors. And so she's faced with these issues, and so she takes the problems that she's faced with in the OR and with her patients, and she brings it into the lab.
So, Dr. Rafuse, I just want to ask Dr. McIsaac a question, but before I do that, because I'm worried my time is definitely going to run out.
35 seconds.
And there's
really
so much
short,
I just want to remind you that the committee would love to take written comments from anyone that you wish. So, Dr. McIsaac, I don't know if I have any points, but the early childhood education, the fact that the affordable child care, I know you've advocated for based on research and school-based health promotion and social determinants. Can you tell us the value of that social science and health promotion research for Canadians and the type of research on public policy? And go ahead.
15 seconds to do social determinants.
Well, maybe I'll just mention its relevance. So I think that early learning and childcare agreement, one really important connection to science is the opportunity it provides for early career researchers, and addresses a really important barrier that a lot of early career researchers are experiencing during life transitions that many of them are having at that time. So I'm really happy to see it that happening, and that relates to enabling researchers to do science, to have access to.
Dr. McIsaac. That was really.
And I'm hoping some of my other colleagues will get back to you both on those.
Thank you, Ms. Diab. And now we will go to Monsieur Blanchet-Jeancat for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the witnesses for being here tonight. My questions are first for Mr. Smith. In the report from the scientific inaudible due to interference, there's a heterogeneity and complexity with the government's approach to supporting research organisms. There's not enough coordination between the many organizations. From your point of view and in your experience, do you share this opinion?
The coordination has certainly improved. This is certainly one of the areas, I think, where additional improvement could be made in terms of thinking about a global, a national strategy for some of the major research facilities. And so thinking about the priorities that we are trying to address as a country, the tools that we need, and the way that we develop those tools. I think one of the areas that this touches on is that the length of time required to develop and build the sort of infrastructures that Triumph represents is measured in many years. So we have been operating for 50 years, a variety of different accelerators, and to upgrade those accelerators, bring in new technologies, these can be decadal programs. And so having the ability to sustain a strategy and a program over the length of time required for the full lifespan of a facility like Triumph is extremely critical. So although I think the coordination, of course, there are new committees looking at coordination between the councils and CFI. Although that coordination is certainly improving, I think this is an area where additional improvement would really benefit Canada.
Merci beaucoup, Dr.
Thank you very much, Dr. Smith. You talked about strategy. What improvements can be brought to have a better strategic approach to these big institutions?
Thank you for the question. I think it does revolve around thinking about the priorities that the country has, the sort of tools and techniques that will be required to deliver on those questions. So the ability to tie together and work collaboratively in terms of the infrastructures that we need to develop. As you build a new large-scale accelerator, for instance, that will take many years, hundreds of millions of dollars. And so the ability to understand the sort of science that it will address, make sure that you are bringing in the community through building that strategy, which is both collaborative, making sure that you are talking from a bottom-up perspective. What are the researchers in universities, researchers within the country trying to address, but also some element of that top-down perspective that we have grand challenges that we know we will need to address in the future. What are the tools and the techniques that we will need to address those grand challenges, and make sure that that coordination occurs across a time scale commensurate with building these facilities. As an example, looking towards things like climate change and understanding how we can address climate change, we will need to bring in a whole host of different tools, including the ability to understand, for instance, advanced materials. If we're looking to develop battery technology, we need to understand how batteries work, how the surfaces, the interfaces work. And that's the sort of area that a facility like Triumph excels at, using particle probes to understand how surfaces, how materials operate. So we need to make sure that we're looking as a country at the sort of questions that we ask, how we bring all of these things together, both bottom up and top down.
Merci, Dr. Smith.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. You've suggested many challenges, coordination, having vision. Can you tell us what the main challenges are that Canada will have to face in mega science?
That's a great question. I think it touches on many of the grand challenges that people will be aware of in terms of climate change is an obvious one, looking at how we can bring our tools to bear. But Triumph is a fundamental research facility, and it's based in particle physics, it's based in nuclear physics. And so we need to make sure that we're able also to address many of the challenges that our community is looking to explore over the next few years. And so that fundamental research, as has already been mentioned tonight, that's the inspirational angle that will bring people into research. And so one might think that discovering the Higgs particle is extremely esoteric, but it was a fantastic opportunity to really inspire the next generation of researcher, the next generation of engineer. And so, although it's a very specific particle physics question, the highly qualified personnel, the students, the postdocs that get inspired by those sort of questions, then go on and lead other opportunities and other options that will address these grand challenges.
Merci beaucoup de nous avoir partagé.
Thank you for sharing this information with us, Dr. Smith.
Merci, Ms.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blanchette de Jonca.
And now we will go to Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes, and we really appreciate the discussion. Mr. Cannings.
Well, thank you. And I'll continue with Dr. Smith. Thank you for the invitation to tour Triumph. I had the wonderful opportunity many years ago when Triumph was still pretty young, and I was obviously a lot younger, to tour Triumph, and it would be interesting to see how it has changed. I also had the kind of random luck to be put in a cabin on a train across Canada with one of the scientists who worked on the CERN particle detector team from Triumph on the Higgs particle project. So that was, don't test me on how all that works, but it was all very interesting. And I all this to say that it was very exciting to be working at UBC as I was back in the late 70s, early 80s when Triumph was just starting. It was a very much a point of pride there. And at that time, you know, I think it was 3 universities had teamed up, you know, hence the name. And, you know, this is a real big example of cooperation, big science. How does that work nowadays with Triumph in terms of Canadian universities or universities from wherever who actually have a say and a part of that team that run Triumph?
So we have expanded the number of Canadian universities who are effectively members of Triumph. We're just going through an incorporation process at the moment, but we hope by the end of the year that we'll actually have 21 Canadian universities as member of Triumph, and that goes all the way from Vancouver through to Halifax. And that demonstrates the interest that the university researchers have in operating or being part of an endeavor like Triumph, because it allows their researchers to engage in the research that interests and drives and inspires them. And so we have expanded from the TRI. The TRI in Triumph is Tri-University Meson Facility. That we no longer use that acronym because I don't know what the word would be for 21, but it keeps changing. And so we are certainly a demonstration of that ability within Canada to collaborate between the universities, but it also demonstrates the need for these major research facilities, that an operation like Triumph is too large for any one or even 3 universities to sustain. And we are constantly looking to bring in other researchers and other universities to support the work we're doing.
And just to expand on that, how does it work when your scientists are working at CERN? Are you connected with CERN in a real way, or is it just people applying to work at CERN, getting time on the accelerators?
No, we thank you for the question. We actually have two aspects there. One is the detectors themselves that the researchers are interested in, but also the accelerator at CERN, the Large Hadron Collider. And one of the aspects that Triumph is engaged in at the moment is we secured $10 million to build components of the next generation of the LHC. There's what's called a high luminosity upgrade to the accelerator itself. And Triumph is ideally suited to provide those components because we are world experts in what's called superconducting RF technology, which is used in these accelerators. Now, the contribution that we make to CERN as the accelerator is in some sense a gateway that we use to allow our researchers then to engage in the science there as well. Canada is not a member of CERN, but it's associated with the research there, of course. And so by having this in-kind contribution to the accelerator, we make sure that Canadian scientists are more than welcome to utilize those facilities. For the projects that the detectors, we also act as a springboard, if you like, so that we are doing coordination work, but also using things like our detector technology team here in developing some of the techniques that might be used at CERN. And that then becomes very collaborative with the university researchers. So there are two angles there. One is the detector, one is the accelerator itself.
Right, and I'll just switch quickly to, you mentioned isotope analysis and the medical isotopes that you produce at Triumph and are produced in other parts in Canada. I know there was a kind of a crisis situation a few years ago, I think around Chalk River, where suddenly there was a gap in isotope production. Where is that right now, and how do you fit in, and what about the other isotope producers in Canada? How does that work? I mean, do you work with CNL, or how is that all organized, I guess?
Thank you for the question. So this is certainly an area where there is a lot of collaboration between the players within Canada, and this is to do with the development of technetium-99 as a radioisotope for medical imaging. And there are several players. So the Canadian Light Source has an approach. Triumph is heavily engaged in these in the production of these isotopes as well. So we developed a new process to allow us to create those isotopes. We do work with Chalk River. We do work with CNL. And that's part of that collaborative aspect of ensuring that we're working across the major research facilities generally. But this is an area that is growing, and Triumph is certainly aiming to be one of the...
Dr. Smith, I apologize. It's the worst part of
Thank
this
you.
when all of you are sharing such important information in your research, so please forgive me. We are now going to go to the 5-minute rounds, and we're going to hear from Ms. Gladue for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. I'm going to start with Dr. Rafuse. Now, I've had the pleasure, in fact, of touring Dalhousie and the Brain Repair Center there, and I know that we are leaders in brain research in Canada. So the question for you is, how do we maintain that leadership and strengthen our position in the world?
Oh, thank you for the question. I think the maintenance of the leadership is our ability to continue to attract young researchers. I think it's been mentioned earlier, young researchers are really the future of research in Canada, and we have to find better ways across Canada to make sure that we attract young people across different cultures and disciplines to do research. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we're faced with. We definitely are now working more closely, I think, with our fellow institutes across Canada, and I think that's a recurring theme. Dr. Smith was alluding to as well. I mean, collaboration in Canada is one of the key things that keeps Canada strong. So we have our local strengths, and we're challenged to maintain that. But I think as a nation, it's something that we're faced with too, is how to continue to attract young researchers and keep them in science. It's a big challenge, and I think it's a national issue that we all have to address.
Thank you. And Dr. Smith, I have had the pleasure of touring Triumph as well, and that's a very impressive facility. So same question for you. We're leading there. How do we strengthen our position and make sure we don't fall behind?
So I think this touches on the question of building an ecosystem across the major research facilities, making sure that we are able to support that ecosystem in a way which optimizes the investment that is being made. So I think this is where I would go back to ensuring that we are building a strategy across the research facilities and then providing sufficient support across the entire life cycle of those facilities, not just the capital investment, but also the operational aspects of a facility, which is generally about 10% year on year of the capital cost. So ensuring that we can build a facility, maintain that facility, keep the facility operating, and basically at the world-class top of the game of the facility through continued investment across the lifespan of the lab.
Very good. Now, I know all of you know that the Naylor report recommended that the government increase the spending for research, and the funding has not yet been realized. So the quick question for each of you is, would you agree that we should implement that recommendation from the Naylor report? Start with you, Dr. McIsaac.
I think more funding is certainly a common thread, probably in all the witnesses that have been brought forward. I think.
Good. I just want to get you all on the record.
Yeah.
Dr. Refuse.
Yeah. I'm on the record of saying yes.
Dr. Smith.
I have to agree with the previous two speakers. Yes, I mean, more funding is always good.
Excellent. Next one for Dr. McIsaac. I'm very interested in your research on newcomers. What can we leverage from your research to the Ukrainian immigrants that we're bringing now to the country?
Oh, what an important question, certainly. So I think in our research, what we've really tried to do is leverage the voices of families, the firsthand voices. So I think listening to experiences, understanding their needs, and building supports that are relevant and meaningful. And science can help us do that. Science can be social sciences. It can be really building programs, policies that support Canadians. And that's a real important part of the work that I do, certainly.
Good. And I would invite you, if you want to submit any other recommendations or leverage your work through the committee, that would be great. Final question on the aging brain. We've got 1 in 6 seniors in the country. It's going to be 1 in 4 in just less than 5 years. So Dr. Refuse, what do we need to do there?
Thank you for the question. If I had another hour, I could probably adequately address it. But in the short term, I think we need to develop a strategy, and I think the strategy should be based on the aging brain and not based on specific diseases. And I think that's one of the failures of neuroscience research, is that it's all based on, Alzheimer's versus Parkinson's versus ALS.
I'm sorry to do this, and you're just getting wound up to talk about this really important area. Thank you, Ms. Gladue. And with that, we will go for 5 minutes to Mr. McKinnon.
Thank you, Chair.
Your mic. Your mic.
Well, thank you, Chair. So I'm going to pick on Dr. Smith, because my riding is Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, so we're kind of neighbors. And as the case with Ms. Gladue, I've actually toured Triumph in recent years as well, and I certainly would underscore your recommendation that the committee take the opportunity, if it can, to have that tour. And I know, as Mr. Canning mentioned, you've picked up a great deal of the slack that came from shutting down the NRU reactor at Chalk River. And I'm wondering what kind of commercialization is available from all the research and technologies you guys have developed, whether you're able to leverage that into support for the organization, for the ongoing maintenance and development and evolution of research.
Thank you for the question. So for commercialization, we actually have a separate arm of Triumph called Triumph Innovations. And the intent of Triumph Innovations is to look into Triumph, identify any IP that can be spun out or commercialized, and work both with our researchers and external groups to try and develop new approaches or techniques that can be put to market. The medical isotopes is certainly an area where that's very active at the moment, and we are beginning to develop commercialization links with several groups, but we do have a group actually located on Triumph called BWXT, who run a suite of cyclotrons that are used for isotope development. So we are basically generating income either from royalties or some of the operational aspects as BWXT create these isotopes, and they go as far abroad as UBC and Australia. So it's a very broad set of destinations for those products. I would note that the commercialization income were about $90 to $100 million operational cost per year. And of that, somewhere between around 10 to 15% of that is derived from those commercial operations. But we would certainly note that commercialization is just one of the benefits that we can create. And so the societal benefit from being able to create these isotopes and hopefully cure cancers and certainly use them for diagnostics is one of the real one of the big societal benefits that we can introduce. So not just the commercialization and the income creation, but also the impact of the technologies and the techniques that are being developed here.
Thank you. And as a major big science institution, I know that you attract a great deal of highly qualified people from all over the world. I'm wondering if you could speak to us a bit about what brings them, what keeps them here, what attracts them.
That's a great question. As somebody who came from the UK in 2009 to Canada, actually I came here to run Snow Lab, which is a deep underground facility in Northern Ontario, and was so enamored with the Canadian system, the opportunities here, that I am now Canadian, a joint Canadian-UK citizen. So that's an illustration that the Canadian research ecosystem is really attractive. There are areas that Canada excels, and by doing that, you can you certainly do attract people from all over the world. I would note as another example of the benefits of the major research facilities and the ability to use them as training opportunities is that when people do leave Triumph, they are often going to highly, very top positions in other labs around the world. And so by being able to attract people to Canada and train them, it's not just the ability to keep them here, but also to ensure that we are adding value to the ecosystem.
Well, thank you. I think that's my time.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. That's very gracious of you. Dear colleagues, we've come to the end, and I want to thank all of you. We thank you for coming. We thank
Madam
you
Chair,
for
point
your
of order.
work. Yes, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Lawrence.
Mr. McKinnon.
Oh, Mr. McKinnon. Sorry, Mr. McKinnon. Yes.
No worries. I just note that our Bloc and NDP colleagues tend to get a little bit shortchanged, and given that it's Mr. Canning's birthday, I wonder if we can give them a couple of minutes.
Thank you. With the will of the committee, I think we could do 2.5 minutes to each, but it would be with the will of the committee and Mr. Canning's birthday. To the committee.
Okay, did you say I should go first because it's my birthday?
Was there agreement?
I don't know.
Mr. Clerk?
People are nodding? Okay.
There's agreement.
Okay,
I'm wasting my 2.5 minutes, so I better get going.
Mr. Canning's, we have to give it to Mr. Blanchet-Jean for 2.5 minutes, and then to you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to my colleague, Mr. McKinnon, for this birthday gift. It's not my birthday. I would have taken it in the first round, but I'm happy to take it now. My question is for Dr. Rafuse. I have a broad question. What are your expectations for the federal government now?
Very good question. I think the expectation is let's broaden or increase the funding for discovery research. I think that's fundamentally, even for the mega projects like Dr. Smith's been talking about, you actually have to have individuals across Canada that can participate in such a phenomenal facility. So I think we need to make sure that we keep them funded and increase the funding of all Canadians that deserve funding.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go quickly with Dr. McIsaac. Dr. McIsaac, I was very intrigued by your research chair on early childhood education. As you know, in Quebec, we've had a network for early childhood education for 20 years, and this was a very innovative and ingenious program that I think is now inspiring the rest of Canada. Did you have the opportunity to collaborate with Quebec scientists about your studies?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think we certainly do have a lot to learn from those in Quebec with respect to where we're going in the early learning and childcare system in Canada. It's really an exciting time to be doing research and science in this field. So I have had the opportunity to connect a bit with scientists in Quebec, and I think more cross-Canadian collaboration would be so important as we move forward with this real fundamental shift in the way that the early learning and childcare system is being built, is being supported and implemented for families, for early childhood educators, and for Canadians. So yes, I have, and I look forward to more opportunities.
Merci beaucoup, Dr. Marcaza.
Thank you very much. What are your expectations for the federal government as well?
Well, I think I think in addition to discovery research, I think bringing voices of Canadians to science and research, I think is really important. Leveraging, making sure that the research that we do has impact on research, on additional research, on policy, on practice, and that Canadians can access that information, and that information is being
Dr. McIsaac. Thank you. You're always very succinct. We appreciate that. And Mr. Cannings, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to direct my questions to Dr. Refuse. In terms of Canada funding things that we're good at, it seems that there are certain areas where Canadian research has excelled and has attracted good researchers from around the world. I'm just wondering about your own field, the Brain Repair Center. I know when I worked at UBC in the Department of Zoology, we had ICORD working on, the repair of neural systems. Is that one of the areas that you think Canada excels at, and how should we be, nourishing these areas of excellence?
Well, thank you for the question, and yes, I agree 100%. Neuroscience research, Canada hits well above its weight in neuroscience research, and many maintain it to this day. And I think we were successful in attracting people from all over the world to come here and make Canada a place to establish a career. What do we have to do to maintain that and increase that? I think we need, and we're doing it. We need to develop systems to collaborate better across Canada. And I think, trying to find funding opportunities to enable us to do that more efficiently would be outstanding. But all across Canada, and pretty much every university that I can think of, there's some expertise, if not outstanding expertise in neuroscience. And the idea is, how do we communicate together? We do it because it's the nature of science, but to make it really grow and be to become something bigger than what it is today.
Okay, I just
really requires
quick question. The yellow card is up, and that is just some quick final thoughts on smaller universities. You mentioned UPEI. You said, I think, something like CFI is not a national program. How can we make sure that we provide the funding for those smaller places?
In one sentence, get rid of the match.
That was succinct. I want to say thank you, Mr. Cannings. I want to say thank you to all our witnesses. We thank you for your research. We thank you for sharing your research with us, and we all wish you continued success. We'll say good night to you, and to our colleagues, if we could log off, we have to come back for committee business, and we've got quite a bit of work to do. Thank you again to the witnesses. Bye then. Meeting adjourned.